Destoroyah is the next MONSTERVERSE villain? Today we're going to be watching a video that explains everything we know about Destoroyah coming to the MONSTERVERSE. Let's go.
There is one monster in
Goji
all of
Center.
Godzilla history that posed a real challenge for Godzilla.
Destoroyah.
A creature with weapons that
The
are
most
difficult to
iconic?
counter,
No,
size
isn't
that will
Destoroyah
make
the most
Godzilla
iconic?
look small, and an evil personality. It's this one, Destoroyah.
Destoroyah is like
Today
Godzilla,
on
but
Goji
very
Center,
evil.
We'll provide an answer to a question everyone's been wondering about. What if Destoroyah made his debut in the
I can't wait.
MONSTERVerse?
He has to be
Will
the
he
next
look
villain.
Similar? How does the MONSTERVerse timeline set up the return of this kaiju? And finally, will this creature be more powerful than Godzilla?
Look how big he is compared to
And
Shimo.
finally, will this
Look at Shimo and Godzilla and Destoroyah. Oh my, this...
creature be more powerful than Godzilla? Stay until the end to find out.
I think he will be.
Before we start talking about the MONSTERVerse at all, let's do a quick recap and refresh our memories on the history and abilities of this kaiju. This is important because by doing this, we'll have a very good idea of how this guy will fit
I'm
into
scared
the
of
MONSTERVerse.
this MONSTERVerse Destoroyah.
First appeared in the 1995 film Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, the last of the Heisei Godzilla
He
series.
literally killed Godzilla's
But
son.
it didn't always look like this. Going back a few decades, in 1954, in the original Godzilla film,
what?
we witnessed the use of a weapon known as the Oxygen Destroyer, used to kill Godzilla in Tokyo Bay. What nobody knew was that in this precise location, ancient Precambrian crustaceans underwent mutations thanks to the effects of this weapon, instigating an evolutionary process that would bring forth nightmarish creatures that would only be countered with a combination of maser cannons, the high-tech aircraft Super X-3, AH-64 Apaches, and Type 90 tanks. This footage courtesy of War Thunder.
Bro.
The micro-oxygen from the Oxygen Destroyer integrated itself into this animal's biology. What makes this kaiju unique is the fact that this creature comes in many different forms.
Wait, isn't that
This
just
will be
evolution
important
like
to keep
Shin
in mind once we
Godzilla?
start talking about its appearance in the MONSTERVerse. The first form was its microform. After the micro-oxygen mutated this animal, these began evolving into a crawling form, feeding itself and eventually reaching sizes that would surpass humans and end up looking like pure nightmare fuel.
That genuinely looks like something from like a horror movie. Look at that! Oh my, they even got Spider-Man's ability of shooting webs.
This and the previous forms were similar in that these animals
just
looked
destroying
very similar
everything.
to a walking crustacean with many limbs, covered by a thick red-colored armor resistant to many firearms. It was at this stage, however, where a few kinks in its armor were beginning to be identified. It was identified that constant exposure to extreme temperatures, in combination with explosive force, would begin compromising this creature's armor.
Wait, what?
This was a weakness.
Wait, so Destoroyah is just... he doesn't like fire, but Godzilla literally has an atomic beam that drilled through the whole world. Yeah, Destoroyah is getting cooked in the MONSTERVerse, but let's see what Goji Center says.
And we'll see in a little bit that this would be a serious problem later. The aggregate form was a result of a supernatural phenomenon where these animals would combine themselves into a stronger and larger creature. This already sounds bad enough, but it gets worse. This aggregate form can morph into a flying creature, seemingly gliding through the air without relying on
I
its
forgot
wings
Destoroyah
to
can...
sustain itself in the air.
For some reason, I forgot Destoroyah can
for the
fly.
final time, change its form yet again. This time turning into what was known as its perfect form.
Perfect? Okay, I wouldn't say perfect. Love Godzilla is perfect.
Destoroyah that stood on two legs, and one that seemingly developed a full endo and exoskeleton. It
He
is
looks
here where it would
chunky,
begin
bro.
causing some real serious trouble to Godzilla. And if this form were to be translated into the MONSTERVerse, it would be even worse. The original perfect form of Destoroyah stood a whopping 120 meters in height. That is around the same height as legendary Godzilla in 2019.
That is the... wait,
Beyond.
what?
Compared to Godzilla in the film, we're talking about almost a 66-foot difference.
This is back in
Destoroyah was equipped with
1999, by
arms
the
with
way,
three
guys.
claws oriented in a way that it could hold an opponent or clench these together to serve as piercing weapons. Its hallmark frill is present among most of its different forms, with a prominent horn in the center of its head. Wingspan-wise, we're talking about 210 meters. That is 689 feet. Equally as intimidating, the Destroyer had a very long tail, present in most of its forms, but most lethal in its flying and perfect forms.
His tail is honestly... People who played Kaiju Universe know how annoying his tail is.
With energy-absorbing properties that would drain energy from its opponents. Now that we're talking about weapons, we'll go ahead and highlight a few that will probably make a transition to a MONSTERVERSE version of Destoroyah in some way or form. Beginning with its Oxygen Blast, which was present in the juvenile, aggregate, flying, and perfect forms. This blast was described as having the power of the Oxygen Destroyer that ended up killing Godzilla. Earlier in the film, in a live interview, Dr. Ejuan did mention that this stuff was powerful enough to penetrate metal, meaning that this could be used as a world-ending weapon.
Nah, Godzilla's atomic beam is still stronger.
This destructive force was present in these smaller crustaceans, but as Destoroyah began reaching larger sizes, this weapon began to show signs of being much more powerful. Destoroyah in its aggregate form was able to inflict a fatal wound to Godzilla Jr., injecting this destructive matter inside its body, causing him to foam in the mouth and suffocate.
I feel so bad for Godzilla Jr. because he's getting destroyed left and right.
But what if it did appear in the MONSTERVERSE?
Okay.
Does this cinematic universe set the stage for the return of this monster? The answer is a solid yes.
I can't
the
wait.
directors of Godzilla King of the Monsters saw fit to reintroduce another element present in the classic Godzilla films, the introduction of the Oxygen Destroyer.
Yeah, we saw this by the way, so this probably is going to be happening.
A bomb filled with chemical compounds would be detonated in the waters where the target would be at. During its release, a chemical reaction would remove the oxygen
This nearly
from the
killed
water,
Godzilla, by the way. This destroyed him.
To all living organisms. This can also lead to cellular destruction and imminent death in the creature affected by it. So, since we already have an Oxygen Destroyer detonation happening in the MONSTERVERSE timeline, we would have a good excuse for some ancient lifeform who happened to be in the way of this blast to one day evolve to become the new Destroyer. But who knows? Maybe this creature already exists in this timeline.
Bro, I
From
think...
this point on, the remainder of this episode is 100% pure speculation. So
No, if Godzilla's... If Goji Center says this, I believe it 100%.
So, with that in mind, let's talk about where Destoroyah might be in the MONSTERVERSE.
I think he's in
Our
Antarctica.
speculative Destoroyah timeline will begin in 2019 in Isla de Mara off the coast of Mexico.
Okay.
After the detonation of the Oxygen Destroyer, several Precambrian crustaceans made contact with this chemical reaction. The origin
Wait,
of the
look at his
MONSTERVERSE could be
mouth!
one of many. Some may have just been already present in the surrounding strata, or to make things more interesting, these may have made their way to the surface from a near Hollow Earth vortex. A place where many creatures resembling
Imagine Destroyer goes to the Hollow Earth.
from. Once making contact with this chemical reaction, these crustaceans would have mutated over time. Come the events of GXK and the discovery of even more Titans. Monarch would at this point still be oblivious to the existence of these constantly mutating organisms. With each passing day, these small creatures begin evolving, reproducing themselves mutation after mutation. If you recall from the 1995 film, the power of micro-oxygen was wielded not just by the latter forms of Destoroyah, but also the smaller forms. And since we already established that Destoroyah is able to absorb DNA from its victims and integrate characteristics of its prey into itself, it's likely that Destoroyah would attain characteristics of other classes of animals.
Imagine he killed Rodan, that's why he has wings.
In the MONSTERVERSE timeline, these sea-dwelling animals may have grown large enough to catch and mutilate big prey. Prey big enough to catch the attention of humans. The findings of large marine animals and consistent types of wounds on prey animals will eventually catch the attention of Monarch, who will eventually connect the dots and begin the search of whatever it is that is killing these animals. At this size, the crustaceans would be large enough to cause damage to larger life forms. In the original 1995 film, it was at this point when these creatures began making contact with humans. If Destoroyah ever makes it into the big screen in this franchise, our best guess is that they wouldn't skimp on the opportunity to make these monsters interact with humans.
Oh my days, why does Destroyer keep... What was that mouth?
At a more personal level. At this point, the micro-oxygen blast of these animals would be strong enough to mortally wound humans in an instant. Bulletproof and numerous horde of these crustaceans from hell would be nothing short of a horrific thing to witness. Monarch would have collected enough samples at this point to figure out where these things came from and whose fault it was.
Literally, there's
more specifically,
they literally
the United
created one
States
themselves.
military. This oxygen destroyer would once again bite humanity in the ass after a few decades.
Ooh.
And given that these creatures seem to have a mind of their own and a special affinity to destroying things and becoming bigger and more powerful, someone else will begin to take note of this growing threat. Destoroyah is one of the very few examples of kaiju who...
Imagine Godzilla dies to Destroyer and that's how the Monsterverse ends. What would you guys think about that?
In the eyes of Destoroyah, these titans, amongst other powerful titans like Rodan, for instance, would be seen as a buffet instead of just another form of opposition.
No.
Admittedly, the Monsterverse rendition of Destoroyah would still welcome radioactive energy with open arms. Before we talk about how powerful Destoroyah could be in this universe, let's quickly talk about how Destoroyah would look in the Monsterverse.
Ooh,
The first thing that
I
comes
love
to
this
mind
design,
is
by the way.
size. And this thing in this
He will be
universe
huge.
nothing short of massive.
Massive.
We
I
aren't
think
here
the
to predict
biggest
exactly
Titan.
how big, but for fun, let's use the size comparison between Destoroyah and Godzilla in the 1995 film. If we use the same size difference ratio seen in this
No, that's
movie,
not that bad.
this means that proportionally speaking, we are looking at a Destoroyah that is around 471
Oh
feet in
my.
height. This isn't taller than
What?
upright Shimo or Ghidorah. Size in this case isn't the most dangerous characteristic of
Bro,
this
that's still
monster.
terrifying.
More on this in a little bit.
Look
Now
at his
to
face,
physical
look at his
characteristics.
wings.
In this more grounded and realistic take on a kaiju universe, design-wise, some of the physical traits of Destoroyah's final perfect form won't really hold up in the Monsterverse. That said, the overall designs of the crawl, juvenile, aggregate, and even the flying form hold up kind of well by today's design standards. With a bit of tweaking, the flying form of Destoroyah would still look pretty good in the
okay.
Monsterverse film.
He's just
It's
10
the
times
perfect
bigger.
form that will need some work. Why? Well, if you remember, Destoroyah's perfect form was also capable of flight. The problem here is that an animal this bulky, with especially thick legs, would have a very hard time flying with wings this small. To raise an animal like this into the air requires massive amounts of force. This requires stronger muscles and larger wings.
my, how big was
There
his
are
legs
many
gonna be?
talented artists online who already took a stab at making a Monsterverse version of Destoroyah. Some of these include those made by Jared Medina or Sang
This is
Moon, or
amazing.
updated versions of the Destroyer kaiju that would fit well with the Monsterverse's monster
Bro, if that is the next Destroyer, I am leaving the cinema because I pooped my pants.
aesthetics. One common characteristic of these newer artist renditions is the incrementing of the wing's surface area.
That is
Some,
huge.
such as this one, even went as far as reducing the mass of the legs and increasing the muscle
That
mass
is-
on the chest and back.
that is
as to give
horrifying.
more power to the wings that will aid in flight. In general, a Destoroyah would have to follow these design choices for it to be able to fly realistically, more or less. Larger chest and back muscles to provide enough muscle power to sustain flight, a larger set of wings to provide enough surface area to push sufficient air downwards to then allow the body to levitate.
no way.
Lightweight,
No,
but
I don't believe
extremely
that.
resistant chitinous armor, not
No.
too heavy to make this creature exert too much energy while flying, and reduced mass on its legs.
That is
as compared
humongous.
to its
That is
original
Godzilla
form in
Earth size.
1995. These attributes are a good starting point to make Destoroyah comfortably fit in the design choices of other Monsterverse kaiju. As we can see, Destoroyah, if it does indeed match these parameters, would be an absolute unit
I think
of a
Destoroyah
monster.
would- bro.
Unmatched in terms of strength, and in this case,
Look at Kong compared to Destroyer. Kong looks like Destroyer's son. But what would happen if Destroyer was in the Monsterverse? I want you guys to let me know who do you guys think will win. Shimo, Godzilla, Kong, or Destroyer. But anyways, that's gonna be the end of this video. I hope you guys like it. Peace.